Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming today. I'm Representative Joe Ciresi. I want to thank you for coming out to this press conference regarding fully funding our public education system. I want to thank our hosts today, the Perkiomen Valley School District. Let's give them a nice round of applause for having us here today. And our superintendent here, Dr. Barbara Russell, who you'll hear speak in a little while. Today, we're here to talk about fully funding our educational system and making sure that every child has what they need. Now, let's talk about the number that's sitting next to me, number 45. As most of you know, I'm a huge sports fan. But 45 is not a number of a sports athlete. 45 is not the number of a president. 45 may be the year that John Armato was born, but I'm not sure. And 45 is not my age. 45 is where we stand in the United States in funding public education. We are 45th. This is something that none of us who stand here today should be proud of. 45th in making sure that every child has what they need. 45th in making sure that our taxpayers are getting their money's worth on their public taxes that they pay for our school districts. 45th, when we're the 5th biggest state, I mean now the 6th in the union. 45th. We shouldn't be proud of the number 45. As we look across at where we are in funding in our school districts across the state, we see districts that don't have bathrooms that could be used. Their heating systems need to be fixed. They don't have enough teachers for the classrooms or guidance counselors. They have books that are 30 years old. They're crushed into a room because we don't fund public education properly. We see areas that their taxes are through the roof. Now, I happen to represent one of those areas, the Pottstown community, that has struggled for years. $14 million underfunded every single solitary year. Let's compact that every year and see how much that becomes, where the local taxpayers take the burden, where we stand here in Perkiomen Valley, where there's a prison, and there's state lands where they don't have the opportunity to bring more community in for business. This district is underfunded. The district where I live, the Springford community, which we've been blessed to have such a great school district, is underfunded. And as we look across the Commonwealth, we see more and more and more underfunding. The plan that we're putting forth is to say that we are lucky this year that the budget's coming out with a $3 billion surplus. Well, it's a little bit over $3 billion. Now, this doesn't touch any of the federal money that we're seeing, the $7.2 billion that will come from the federal government. We have a $3 billion surplus, and what we're asking for is to take a little bit over $1 billion of those dollars and fund public education fully. So every child in this Commonwealth, the 500 districts, have what they need. And it's not based on a zip code or where you live. As I said, I represent the 146th district, and I'm proud to represent this district, and have served formally, as all of you know, as a school board member. And when I looked at the numbers for the 146th district, my mouth hung open. $20 million is what will come back to our district if we're able to fund this properly. $20 million is what we'd have an opportunity to reduce our local taxes by. That's a significant number for every one of our taxpayers in this community. And we often hear from our seniors who say, I need my taxes lowered. This is an opportunity for us to work together with our school districts to say, yes, we can finally do what's right and make sure that every child has what they need. Now, you didn't all come here to hear me speak, I'm sure. But there's a list of representatives, school board members, community members. This is a bipartisan group of people that are standing here to my left that I'm going to introduce to speak to you. But I also want to acknowledge some of the other superintendents who are here in the crowd. Bob Rizzo, who's from Springford, Dr. Alan Roach, who's from Upper Perk, former Superintendent Myra Forrest. Is there anyone I'm missing? Shay, Norristown School District, thank you for being here. Each one of the people are going to speak about how this will affect their district and what the opportunities are moving forward with this $1 billion. So now I'd like to introduce school board member from Pottstown Area School District, Laura Johnson.
That's going to have to be adjusted. Before I give my remarks, I just wanted to say thank you to Representative Ciresi for having us all here. This is an important issue, and he has just been really critical in promoting fair funding. So, as mentioned, my name is Laura Johnson. I'm a taxpayer, a school board member, and a parent in Pottstown School District. I love my school district, and I love our students. Our community is diverse, hopeful, and tenacious. Those qualities are what bring me here today. Let's start with a basic statement. My children and their classmates matter. No legislator would dare say otherwise. Yet the legislature shortchanges every Pottstown student around $4,000 in education funds each year. Inequitable funding means our students are burdened with large class sizes. Inequitable funding means they have a fraction of the foreign language, music, and AP courses available to them that their peers might have in neighboring districts. Inequitable funding means that we pay our educators the lowest salaries in the county, hurting not only our teachers, but ultimately hurting the students who have to deal with that frequent teacher turnover. If that isn't enough, let me tell you what happened when the pandemic hit last year. On March 12th, all Monco schools were shut down. The following week, some schools were already able to restart new learning. They had the devices, they had the internet connections, and they had the online learning platforms ready to go. As the first several weeks rolled on, more and more schools were able to ensure that students had what they needed to continue their education from home. It wasn't until May 4th that Pottstown was finally able to ensure that each family, not each student, each family, had at least one device available, and we resumed new learning. Why did it take so long? Well, we had to fundraise for Chromebooks. Let me repeat that. We had to fundraise for Chromebooks in the middle of a pandemic. This story is one you'll hear all around the Commonwealth. When the pandemic hit, underfunded and economically disadvantaged districts simply did not have the resources we needed to ensure that our students could learn from home. The reason we didn't have those resources is that because while all lawmakers would verbally affirm that students in districts like Pottstown and Scranton and Erie matter, they haven't actually been treating them like they matter. They haven't actually been treating them like they are worthy of a quality education. You know, when advocates like me press lawmakers for solutions, we get all sorts of reasons why they can't. Most of them boil down to something along the lines of, well, I really wish we could, but it's just not politically feasible. Let that sink in. The rationale for continuing to treat students unfairly is that it's not politically feasible to do what is morally right by them. We now have a solution. That solution would bring fair funding to all our schools while ensuring that no school district gets less money than they got the year before. As you all know, this costs money. A number of lawmakers initially said things like, well, that would be a great idea, but we can't raise taxes. Well, here we are. The fair funding proposal that's been put forward would provide for the districts whose students are being shortchanged while ensuring that no district loses money. And thanks to the budget surplus, we wouldn't have to raise any taxes to do that. So ultimately, here is what I'm saying. The time for excuses is done. The time is here to treat all Pennsylvanian children like they matter, because they do. So, thank you. I think next I'm turning it back over to Joe.
Thank you, Laura. And I just want to say that, you know, Laura is a volunteer. She's a school board member. All of our school board members across the Commonwealth are volunteers, 4,500 of them, who are the frontline people with every one of these issues. And being a former member, as I said, I know the heat that you take from the community, and I want to thank each of you for the service that you give to the Commonwealth and to our communities every day, and especially over this last year and 3 months with the pandemic. So thank you again. I now want to introduce the Superintendent of Schools here at Perkiomen Valley, Dr. Barbara Russell.
Thank you, Representative Ciresi. I'm going to do what was just done. Welcome to Perkiomen Valley High School and to our school district, and thank you for the opportunity to host this budget rally. We are very excited to have all of you as guests at our high school today. In schools today, we talk a lot about equity, And when we talk about equity for our students, we do so in a way that prompts us to provide students what they need to be successful. So for example, some students need different academic resources or interventions, or they need additional time for learning, or maybe they even need food. So equity doesn't necessarily translate to equal when it comes to our students. Some receive more and some less, so that we can support them by meeting their needs to be successful. So our school district operates as most do, under the philosophy that all students should be afforded what they need to be able to meet the requirements and graduate from high school. We want all of our students to be successful, to graduate. We also want them to be set up for success upon graduation. The challenge with schools, or for schools, in providing equity is typically based in the financial means to do so. And to really coin something that Joe mentioned earlier, it's unfair, it's unacceptable that a child be educated and afforded or denied the resources based on their zip code, based on where they attend school. So I'm advocating for equity for all school districts in the funding that may be available to them. Here in Perkiomen Valley, about 79% of the overall general fund budget is derived from local revenues paid by our residents. Approximately 19% comes from the state and about 1% to 2% from the federal level. In other districts across the Commonwealth, that can look different. Perkiomen Valley is an example of a school district that's very residential, has very little industry tax base. And there are also two large tax-exempt properties. Again, Representative Ciresi shared this with you, the prison and the college. They take up a lot of space and are tax-exempt. The current budget surplus in Harrisburg could support implementing fair funding and directing state money to school districts based on specific criteria that really impact the work today, such as student enrollments, updated student enrollments, the percentage of economically disadvantaged students, the number of students in special education and eligible for additional resources or services, and the ability of a community to fund its education, its local schools. That should all be fair and equitable across the Commonwealth. For Perkiomen Valley to offer its students a quality education, it's put in a position to keep our local property taxes at a level that may be, and in fact is, difficult for some in our district, for many in our district. So applying a portion of the state's surplus to public schools, it will certainly support qualities like that exist in some of our districts, but it'll pay off in the long run for our students, our residents, and ultimately our society. We want our youth to be educated, to graduate ready to contribute to society and realize what it is they want to pursue and be successful in doing that. I applaud Governor Wolf and our representatives here today for advocating for additional and more equitable educational funding. Thank you for your consideration of the financial resources necessary for schools to provide the highest quality of service to all students in a fiscally responsible manner. Thank you. It would be my honor to introduce Representative Webster. He'll speak next. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Joe Webster, and just for form of reference, I also share the school district with Representative Ciresi, and then add in Methacton, Springford, and West Norristown. And Dr. Dorman will speak a little bit later about the specifics of Norristown District. So I might be the political guy today, so I'll try to, because you're going to hear that mantra from every speaker that we need to take care of every child. So I'm going to go off script just a little bit. We have really, really, really big issues in Pennsylvania. Kids, jobs, healthcare, environment, democracy, big issues. and quality of life things, whether it's clean air or water or investment in infrastructure, right? These are really big things. But I said kids first, because the future of Pennsylvania resides in these schools and these districts, and it has to be equitable for every one of them. So simple statement, and the others can talk about how we struggle through in Harrisburg to break that loose, because though every one of us can say this, there's a lot of, let me just call it inertia in Harrisburg to do this. It's not a done deal. So we need these superintendents and school board members and you and me and everyone else to keep pushing for this to happen. It's not about speeches so much as it is every day getting that message out over and over. So I'll say that, and I'm sort of nuanced about the things that we can add to a great school. You know, whether it's advanced technology class or something in the arts, or whether it's counselors or mental health support for children who've now been through all kinds of traumatic things in Pennsylvania. And personal to me is librarians. I'll tell you why. I was an 8-year-old kid in Philadelphia, and the only thing I cared about at that point in life was baseball. So for every one of you who's a Phillies fan, I'll tell you, I don't have the wheels to go first to third anymore, but I can still throw things at the TV, right? I can still do that when they can't catch a ball in the outfield, for instance. All I cared about was baseball. And I don't know how librarians know these things, but a librarian in my school reached out to me and said, "You ought to read this book." And it was an autobiography about Willie Mays. So I was, number 44, not number 45, right? I was an Irish Catholic white kid in Philadelphia whose hero was Willie Mays about, 3 days later. And I think that's made all the difference. And as we look around the world, we talk about all those big issues. I didn't say equity, all the rights, pay equity, gender equity, LGBTQ rights, all of those things. But maybe it starts with a librarian handing that book to a child and opening their eyes to all of that potential. And I think that's worth $1 billion or more. Because imagine inspiring hundreds of thousands of school children in Pennsylvania that way. Thank you very much. Our next speaker from the school board right here, Perkiomen Valley, Sarah Evans-Brockett. Thank you.
I'll start over. I'm a quotes person, so I'm going to start with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. Upon the subject of education, I can only say that I view it as the most important subject which we as a people may be engaged in. These past 16 months have shown us just how important our schools are. They are not just a place for academics. They're a place where our students come for essential caretaking. Schools provide 2 meals every day. They provide health care, warmth, safety, support, and so much more. We expect our schools to do these things. In fact, our state mandates that we do many of these things. And every year they add more and more mandates, but they don't add any more funding. We are expected to do the same with more or less. Representative Ciresi talked about being ranked 45th, and that bears repeating as many times as we can. We are 45th in the nation for state funding for education. We all heard how important it was for our schools to reopen during this pandemic. Beyond the learning loss that occurred, We heard how child abuse reports were down when teachers weren't seeing their students every day. We saw violence and substance abuse numbers rise. We saw hospitalizations for mental health issues rise. Public schools are essential to the health and well-being of our children, and the evidence could not be more clear. More money for schools means better outcomes for students. And now I'm going to introduce the superintendent from Norristown Area School District, Dr. Christopher Dorman.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to Representative Ciresi for organizing and hosting this event. Thank you to all of our state legislators that traveled from Harrisburg today, because we know you're in session, to be here, and your support for increased funding for all school districts in this great Commonwealth. The time is now to change the way that schools are funded in Pennsylvania. For too long, school districts have had to overly rely on local property taxes, because as Representative Ciresi stated, and this sign puts right here, the Commonwealth has not been paying its fair share, ranking 45th out of 50 states in this country for state funding for education. And that 45th ranking is with an average contribution of 38%. I'm going to come back to that number a little bit later. I'm proud to be here today to support the call to increase education funding by over $1 billion in the next state budget. This adoption will significantly impact the lives of children, but also taxpayers in my community, in every community across Pennsylvania. It's important. I want to share a little bit about Norristown and how a $1 billion increase would impact us. Norristown Area School District, just a couple miles down the road from here, is the home to nearly 8,000 public schools children, 85% of whom are black and brown, and 80% of whom are economically disadvantaged and touched by some level of poverty. When you factor how we have overtaxed our community, we're on a top 25 list that I don't think anybody wants to be on. That is one of the top 25 most underfunded school districts in Pennsylvania, all because the fair funding formula is not being applied. So as you can imagine, I'm often asked by my taxpayers, why are my property taxes so high in Norristown? Well, it's easy to point to PSER's contribution at 35% of your payroll, escalating and unreimbursed charter school payments driven by a 20-year-old law, special education costs, costs of English language learners. But at the end of the day, when the state doesn't pay its fair share, I tell them, I have to raise your taxes because I need you to account for 72% of our school budget, of our revenues. We get just 24% from the state. Remember when I said that 45th percent was based on a 38% average? I'm being shortchanged by 14%. Perkiomen Valley is getting half of what they should of that average at just 19%. When you do that, you're forced to confront what I like to call the three big sins of school budgeting. Increasing your taxes, your local taxes, at or above your Act 1 index, using fund balance as a one-time revenue source to make your budget and close budget gaps, and to cut staffs and programs. In 10 years since state funding was dramatically reduced in 2011, Norristown Area School District committed one of those sins all 10 years that we've budgeted since those budget reductions were made. And worse, we've committed all three sins, raising taxes, using fund balance, and cutting programs 7 of 10 years. Think about the cumulative effect of that. Raising your property taxes at or above your Act 1 index 10 years in a row. We've been rightfully accused of driving our senior citizens out of their homes because we've raised property taxes over 30% in 10 years. Think about the cumulative effect of having to use fund balance in 7 separate budgets to just make ends meet and close revenue gaps. The year I became superintendent in 2018, my business manager handed me a $160 million budget and said, you have $300,000 in the bank. If we didn't get a subsidy payment, we would have been out of business in less than a week. Think about the cumulative effect of reducing staff and cutting programs for 7 straight years because you can't afford them. To serve the social, emotional, mental health needs, which we know in this day and age is more important than ever. In my school district of 8,000 diverse students, I have 1 social worker because of the budget decisions we've had to make. So therefore, I have taxpayers yelling at me, telling me they're paying a whole lot more to get a whole lot less. And guess what? They are 100% right. All these choices have been forced upon us because we've not received what a bipartisan group of legislators determined to be the adequate level of state funding as represented by the fair funding formula. If that formula was paid in full, and with $1 billion investment this year, it could be, Norristown Area School District would receive an additional $18 million each year. For $18 million, I can buy lower class sizes, social workers, counselors, restore cut programs, maintenance and upgrades to my aging school buildings, and provide new opportunities that more affluent districts have had for their students for years. For $18 million, I can provide taxpayers a lower millage rate, ensure senior citizens keep their homes, rise property values in my community, and give our community a feeling that our children have some semblance of equity when it comes to the education that we're able to provide. So why would I ask legislators to support a $1 billion investment in education? Because it supports the future of all children, not just Norristown, not just Perkiomen Valley. All 500 school districts win, because the quality of an education should not be determined by one zip code. The legislators who crafted and overwhelmingly voted for the fair funding formula recognize this. The beauty of the $1 billion proposal is that we can break the cycle of annual budgeting sins. Every district sees more money. Every child wins, whether you attend a rich district or a poor district, a rural district, an urban district, or a suburban district. I implore all of our representatives and state senators to support this investment as an investment in the future of Pennsylvania. All children deserve opportunities to learn, to grow, and to choose their own path to a bright future, not just the paths that their individual school districts can happen to afford under the current system. We have the money in hand to do it now. Let's break the cycle. Let's invest in our students. Thank you. It's my pleasure to introduce State Representative Dan Williams, who represents the 74th Legislative District in Chester County. Representative Williams.
Thank you so very much to Representative Ciresi and to the Perkiomen School District just for the opportunity to speak on an issue that I think is close to the hearts of many of us who are here. I'll admit to you that by whatever evaluation you make, much of whatever I am has been the result of reading and the result of books. I come out of West Philadelphia originally. I've been blessed to represent the 74th District there in Chester County, where Coatesville is one of the most impoverished areas and districts that I happen to serve. We have historically been asking educators to make bricks without straw. And finally, there is an opportunity for us to do something that can change the trajectory of the students behind me in this building, but also the students throughout the Commonwealth. It should not be wasted on anyone that whenever you lose one generation, you do not lose one generation, you lose three. The expectation was that my generation would care for the children that I produce, and that I would also be responsible for the elders, my growing older parents. When we lose a generation, we don't lose one, we lose three, which is why we cannot afford to not invest in this generation. Much of what we have seen in recent weeks has been what I have determined to be hashtag activism. But hashtag activism doesn't change lives. It gets people to a place, but it doesn't create transformation. We now stand in a place poised to be able to do something more than just advocate, to do something more than just talk. We have the opportunity now to change the lives of a generation educationally that will benefit not just themselves, but all of us. It was Nelson Mandela who said that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And yes, some things make change, and there are others who just make noise. This investment in terms of education will not make noise, it will make change. It will make change for seniors, who many of which have lamented leaving their homes because they cannot afford school property taxes. It will make change in the condition of our facilities that are filled with lead paint, poor plumbing, and HVAC issues. It will make changes in the parents who struggle to sometimes educate their children without the benefits of having teachers and programs that help make a difference and make the impact in their child's life. And so my hope is that you understand the need to move this agenda forward by investing these dollars in the lives of those whose lives will make a difference in our own. It's not simply those issues alone. This becomes a moral imperative. If you want to know what a person prioritizes, look at their checkbook, and how they spend will tell you what they really prioritize. We have a chance now to put our money where our mouth is and make the investment in a generation that will pay off dividends in the years to come. And so I'm hoping that you'll join us and the rest of my colleagues with raising your voices to make sure that that investment is made, because this is a moral imperative to make sure that where you live does not determine whether or not you live or die, and that where you live does not determine whether or not you're educated appropriately. Thank you so much. I want to give her the introduction she deserves as well. Let me introduce Bethlehem School District's Dr. Karen Beck Pooley.
Good afternoon. My name is Karen Beck Pooley. I'm a member of Bethlehem Area School District's board. I want to add my voice to those you've heard here and stress, like the others have, that it is time to fix Pennsylvania's current approach to funding public schools. Commonwealth support to districts is both insufficient and it's inequitable. How do we know there's something wrong? Pennsylvania has the largest per pupil spending gap between its wealthiest and its poorest school districts of any state. So that's not just 45th, that's 50th. The gap is so large because the state support for public schools is so small. Pennsylvania currently ranks 45th out of all 50 states in terms of its share of public school funding. Nationally, state dollars account for about half of all public school funding. Here in Pennsylvania, we've heard they account for just a third of that funding. Contribution varies by district. We've heard that already too. In my district, in Bethlehem, state dollars account for only about a quarter of our funding. Making matters worse, state dollars aren't allocated to districts based on need, but instead based on historic funding levels. In fact, about half of each district's current allocation of basic education funding is based on their enrollment in the 1990-91 school year. If you've changed since the early 1990s, you can imagine most of our school districts have too. Need would consider these changes. It would consider, for example, whether a district's enrollments or its students' needs have grown. And we have a system for quantifying need. Pennsylvania's fair funding formula takes all of this into account when determining how to allocate state dollars. It's important to note, as we have already today, that this formula was passed nearly unanimously by both the House, where it got only 3 no votes, and by the Senate, just 1 no vote in 2015. And yet we barely use it. Only 11% of basic education funding is allocated using the formula. This makes Pennsylvania, quote, a case unto itself, according to a 50-state survey of public school funding approaches. We have a tool. Actually, the fair funding formula isn't just a tool, it's the law. And we can't wait any longer to fully implement it in a way that's fair for all of our districts. How long have we waited already? Put it this way. The children who are kindergartners, the year it passed, and it was signed into law at the tail end of the 2015-16 school year, will be entering middle school in the fall. For those students attending underfunded districts, and over half of all Pennsylvania students fall into this category, as do 80% of Pennsylvania students of color, each year they got less than their fair share from Harrisburg. For students in my district, they got about $1,200 less. That's per student per year. Norristown figures a little over $1,500. Pottstown, it's over $3,300. In Allentown, right next to my district, it's about $3,500 per student per year during that stretch. And that adds up. So all while those kindergartners made their way through elementary school, It added up to $67 million for Pottstown, $73 million for Norristown, $118 million for my district, Bethlehem, and $420 million for Allentown. Who pays that price? Our local taxpayers do, as they're the ones paying to maintain essential academic and extracurricular programming. And where they can't, our students do, when spending cuts leave them with fewer teachers, outdated learning material, and scaled back or fully eliminated arts programming and AP courses. And when our schools suffer, our communities do too. Places with higher taxes and struggling schools have a harder time attracting investment. Families with children seek out other districts, and so do other households and businesses, and a vicious cycle starts. This vicious cycle is avoidable. When state funding is tied to districts and students' needs, when state funding is sufficient and it's fairly and equitably allocated, our children get the quality schools they deserve, local taxpayers get the break they need, and our communities get the seeds for future investment. It is time to act. Let's get this done. Thank you. Next up, I'd like to turn things over to State Rep Manny Guzman from Berks County.
Good afternoon, everyone. Fair funding now. That's what we're asking for. Fair funding now. You know, I remember being a student, and I represent the city of Reading in the 127th Legislative District. And unfortunately, the city of Reading, we have the distinct honor, or the mishonor, or the distinct honor, the unfortunate honor, I should say, of being the most underfunded school district in the Commonwealth. We are also one of the most underfunded school districts in the entire country. And you know, I remember vividly being a student in the Reading School District, and I remember math class in 7th grade. It just sticks out to me now. There was a class of 35 of us, and we were sharing 10 textbooks with each other. 35 of us sharing 10 textbooks. Every day, students in my district have to go through that type of reality. And I want to thank our school board members. As a former Reading school board member myself, I always wondered then, why can't we all have textbooks? And it wasn't until I became a school board member in the Reading School District where I realized that we were so vastly underfunded that our textbooks were 20, 30 years old in certain circumstances, and that we had to share resources because that's all the resources that we had that we could afford. Now that I'm a state legislator, I see these deep inequities within our system, within our educational funding system, and quite frankly, a lot of it is rooted in systemic racism. Most of it. When 98% of my students in the Reading School District have to share textbooks with 2-3 other people. When we have to fundraise during a pandemic because my kids don't have devices at home, so we needed to fundraise during the pandemic so that they can get Chromebooks. When my students in the Reading school districts and in urban school districts all across the Commonwealth can't even connect to the damn internet. And then they bring up these test scores. You know, the hypocrisy stinks. And I'm tired of it. With this fair funding formula, the city of Reading could receive over $97 million. Let me put that in perspective. $97 million. That's a whole lot of money. Ain't that right, Joe? That's more money for us to pay our teachers. That's more money for us to get an equitable curriculum. That's more money for us to buy textbooks and computers and pay for social counselors right now, which is something that we don't have. These are real discussions, ladies and gentlemen. These are real lives that are impacted every single day by the lack of our priorities in Harrisburg. Budgets are visionary documents. And every year that we do not pass a fair funding formula, every year that our students in the city of Reading do not have the resources that they need, is every year that I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul. And they want to talk about this hold harmless. That's one of the ways that it was politically viable to get this passed through. Well, let me tell you about hold harmless. Hold harmless means that a whole generation of Manny Guzmans have to fall through the cracks in order for us to get the resources that we're rightfully entitled to. I'm 33 years old, so we're talking about a whole generation of people in my community that are not getting the resources that they deserve because of political ploy to get votes. It's a shame. It really is. So today, as we're hearing from legislators, as we're hearing from school board members and from superintendents, let us remember that you all play a role in this as well. As Representative Joe Webster said, we need your help. We need you to call your legislator. We need you to call your congressperson and to call your school board member, because this is the only way for us to make some sense out of this craziness that we're running into. I'll leave you with this. My school district and the city of Reading, we're going through a lot of challenges, from unequal funding to lead in our water to economic devastation. But every day I am more hopeful. Why? Because we have great representatives on both sides of the aisle that are working together on this issue. And I feel confident that this year is going to be the year that we equitably fund our schools, because we can't wait any longer. With that, I want to introduce your representative, Tracy Pennyquick. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for taking time out of your day to be with us today. I think we all know that the school districts within the Commonwealth, and especially here in Montgomery County, do not receive funding in a fair and balanced way. We've heard that from all the speakers before me. In 2016, when the fair funding formula was legislatively enacted, our schools were promised that they were going to get fair funding. It's 2021, and it's still not there. Here in Montgomery County and other pockets of the Southeast, we have a rapid population growth that has put a huge strain on our schools. One of my school districts in my district, the 147th, Boyertown, has had a 20% growth rate in 10 years. Without funding being distributed in a balanced manner, these schools are going to continue to struggle. And how do they make up that deficit? They ask you, the taxpayer, to pay a little more, and a little more, and a little more. I hear every week from my seniors how they're moving out of Pennsylvania because they can't afford the taxes on their family home. They've worked their entire lives. They're in their 70s and their 80s, and they want to stay in their home until they die. But they can't do that because their school taxes are outrageous, and there's no relief for them. Pennsylvania continues to provide a lot of money to education, but the distribution of those funds is disproportionate, and we are not adequately serving our students. And at the end of the day, it is not about the building, it is not about the school board, it is not about the legislators, it is about the students. I'm a firm believer that every child, regardless of race, zip code, parental family unit, or any other factor that you could use to discriminate a child with, deserves a fair education, an opportunity. Every kid deserves an opportunity. I have seen kids in my 26 years in the military that had never slept on a bed, that barely could read or write. That impacted me. And that made me reach back and say, you know what, no matter what, if a kid can read and write and gets a solid education, the world is theirs. They can do whatever they want to do. I will continue to fight for the state's fair funding formula so that every student in our Commonwealth, whether poor, rich, inner city, rural, it doesn't matter. They are Pennsylvania's future, and I will continue to fight to make sure they have the money they need for their education. Thank you. I'm followed by Springford Area School Director Tom DeBello.
Thank you. Thank you, Tracy. The bad part about going later in the lineup is a lot of people already mentioned some of the things I was going to talk about today. But anyway, as mentioned, my name is Tom DeBello. I'm on the Springford School Board, and I have been serving for the past 11 years. During that time, I also chaired the Finance Committee. And with that, I also sit on the Montgomery County IU Board for the last 11 years. I've been in the leadership role for 9 years of that. And I also am the vice chair of the Western Montgomery Career and Technology Center. So why did I tell you all this? Because I've seen over the last 9+ years the shortcomings from the state with fair funding and funding into the school districts. I've seen it when sitting on the Montgomery County IU Board with 22 school districts representing Montgomery County. I see continuously the challenges that they face. So I do have extensive experience talking about fair funding. In fact, while serving on the Springford School Board, Representative Joe Ciresi and I went to Harrisburg many times speaking with legislators about school fair funding, as well as other topics. We had the opportunity to speak in the Rotunda as well, really fighting for not only Springford, but all the school districts in Montgomery County and across the state related to fair funding. Springford's school district receives roughly 17% of their budget from the state. Roughly 82% of our budget is from the local taxpayers. We do get a generous 1% from the federal government, but the minimal state funding is, the minimal state funding is a representative majority of all school districts across Montgomery County. The burden to support our district and surrounding districts falls directly on homeowners and small businesses. As school board directors, we have to comply with all state mandates, many of which are unfunded, and state school code, which was written over 60 years ago. Districts must meet all financial obligations and regulations, including soaring pension, health care, and charter school costs. We also have an obligation to oversee and maintain the facilities of our districts. But most importantly, we need to make decisions that enhance the educational opportunities for our students. There are school districts across the state, unlike Springford, that receive over 75% of their budget from the state. So that means not only the taxpayers in Springford paying for the majority of our budget, but they're also contributing to many other school districts across the state. I understand it's important for areas like Montgomery County, which has the means, to help offset budgets across the state. And this is definitely related to the hold harmless that you heard about. There are school districts that receive the same amount of funding from the state even after their student population has declined. Unlike districts in Montgomery County, who have seen rapid increases in student population, but the state hasn't provided additional funding to support that increase in student population. Another huge issue is unfunded mandates. Again, you've heard other school board members refer to this. We roughly at Springford have $40 to $50 million in mandates from the state that are unfunded. So let me give you a few examples of that. Our special education budget is $38 million. PA funding for special ed is about $2.8 million. Plus the federal IDEA funding is about $1.5 million. So our annually totaling roughly $4.3 million. We're underfunded approximately $33.7 million just with special education mandates. Our charter school budget is between $3 and $4 million. We're going to come in with our actuals this year because of the pandemic around 4.1 million. There is no charter school funding from the state or federal government. We've heard endlessly about charter school reform. Hopefully that will get done as well. Additionally, the COVID grant guidelines states school districts cannot use grant funds for these increases, even though they are directly related to the pandemic. Our transportation, we're required to provide busing for charter school and non-public school students. The cost is approximately $2 million to Springford. And the state funding subsidies that we're receiving is about 25% of that. So we're, again, only receiving $525,000 of the $2.1 million that's mandated by the state. These are just a few to mention, but proposals like SB 733 just add to unfunded mandates if passed. This bill would require districts to cover the majority of the costs associated to students going to non-public schools, which for Springford is estimated to be roughly $2 million in the first year, and then will grow every year after that. This money will be deducted from our state subsidy. When passing these bills, we need state legislators to truly understand the impact these bills have on public schools. We at Springford truly would appreciate the $1 billion disbursement within not only Montgomery County but across the state in funding for a state, as long as these increases are year after year and not a one-time injection into the budget. But we can't continue with we give it, we take it away in unfunded mandates. Public education is one of the most important aspects of our future. Our children are depending on us to provide the best educational opportunities possible so that they are positioned well to compete globally with kids from around the world. Please keep that in mind and get that additional money brought into the school districts. Thank you. At least I'm not the only one that forgot. I want to introduce from Central Dublin, Beth Sweden. Did I get it right? Sweden. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon. I thank Representative Ciresi for inviting me today. I am Beth Sweden, School Board Director with Central Dauphin School District in the Harrisburg area. We are the 9th largest school district in the Commonwealth. I am not here representing the district. I am here representing myself as a homeowner, taxpayer, and someone helping raise my nephews who are in the district. My older nephew is 17, 6 foot, and 195 pounds, but the 9-year-old in 4th grade still thinks I'm cool a little bit, so I have that going on for me. Representative Ciresi was kind enough to come to one of our school board meetings and talk to us. I spoke with Alex and sort of hinting around, I said, oh, yeah, I guess he doesn't have time to go to school board meetings. Alex said, yeah, I'll be at the next one. So he came to talk to us. From what we learned when he came to speak with us, a district our size would save about $1.4 million. I don't know about you, but I'm not going to turn that down. That would go a long way to help things. I ran in 2017, lost by a narrow margin, came back 2019 and was successful. From the beginning of my time on the board, I have said we need to find other sources of revenue rather than going for the tax increase. We need funding reform at the state level, what has been our mantra today. I have also said board members are in a no-win situation every year of being between the taxpayers and the teachers. Going against the teachers if we don't approve the tax increase, going against the citizens if we do. Reform would allow us to take care of our teachers and not go after the taxpayers every year. We can say reform is going to take a long time. We can say our friends on the other side of the aisle aren't going to support it, or we can fight. That is all. That is why we're all here today, and that is what Joe has done, and I thank him. And I commend Representative Ciresi for his unwavering support of public education, and I was honored to be here today. Thank you.
So I know we took up about an hour. I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank each and every one of the speakers. You've all heard from different people from different parts, not only of the county, but some from different parts of the state and representatives from around the area. And you've all heard the need to fully fund public education. We have an opportunity now that we cannot let pass us by. We can't kick the can another month, another year, another week. This is the moment. And if we don't get this done now, I don't know when we're ever going to get this done. A state that has a $3 billion surplus, $3 billion. $1 billion of that we're asking to take and put into public education, to fully fund public education. And it doesn't matter whose district it is or where it is. Every child needs that opportunity to make sure they have what they need. And not hurt those districts that we had said may have been overfunded. Keep them where they are. But let's fund those districts that need the money. And let's make sure we continue to fund this for our taxpayers in each community and for each child. And as Representative Williams said, it's 3 generations. 3 generations that we hurt with every time this goes by. It's another generation. It's another generation. So again, I want to thank you. I don't know if there's any questions. I would ask for all of the elected officials and school board members and superintendents if we can come up together and take a group picture, even those who didn't speak. Alan, that means you. If we can all come up here and get a picture together, but I don't know if anyone has any questions for us or any closing statements. I think I've covered everything. Figured you would. That's why I gave that opportunity. So regarding how long will we have this and will be a one-time payment? The other day at the press conference we attended, the answer was, we know we have this for at least 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, from the reps that are still here. All right, go ahead. I'm going to have Webster. Go ahead. Webster wants to answer it.
So let me explain the proposal that's on the table in Governor Wolf's budget request would flip the hold harmless agreement. So where we currently have about 11% goes through the fair funding formula and the rest is status quo. He's actually also proposing that this year we flip that to where 89% of the money goes through the fair funding formula. The $1 billion catches everybody back up, and then that's how you pay for it through the out years. That the big money, the big general education fund is now going to, all of that, go through the fair funding formula on an annual basis. Well, obviously you have to pay for it, yes, but what it does is create the opportunity. Because right now we are stuck. The hold harmless agreement, the way it is in the budget language, is inertia. It's status quo, and we can't seem to get out of it. So this is the mechanism that flips that.
So I know I've been long enough. I see this. It's still going. It's still asking the same question, so I'm going to answer it. I don't know what the future holds 4 or 5 years down the road. I do know that if we make an investment in the Commonwealth, in the $7 billion from the federal government, will help us grow Pennsylvania and grow our industries, grow our population, which will add money to our coffers. If we promote the state the way we should in other areas that may include the areas of tourism, more money will come into the state. So it's an obligation of the legislators to make sure that we raise enough money that we can sustain public education where it should be. We've heard it over and over again that we haven't been doing it. We have to find that way that we can continue to do it. And I really believe, Evan, that if we're able to use this $7 billion the right way, Pennsylvania will grow in multiple areas. If we can entice industries back into our state, people to come vacation in the state, movies to be made in the state, all of that will bring an extra income for the state. So I hope that answered some of your question. Anybody have anything else? Well, thank you all for coming out. Like I said, if all the electeds, superintendents, school board staff can come up, we can get a group picture together. Thank you very much.